Hello, God bless. Today I will be reading a repost by Jesus, which was posted on 11/19/2025 from Mandy de la Parisi County Things Channel. And God's physical calendar was 2/14, and on his spiritual calendar it was 7/14. And at that time, on 6/12/2025, Part 4, God's physical calendar was 5/4, and God's spiritual calendar was 9/4. I profess that Jesus Christ is the Son of the living God. He came in the flesh, bled, and died on the cross, and rose on the third day. And Jesus Christ is my Lord and Savior. So now that you understand the wineskin process, son, here is more of an explanation on why the wineskin process is so important. Sometimes Jesus sets us up for situations so we can cleanse our trauma, so he can heal us from things. So he has already showed the group the supernatural. He's already showed me and G the freezing of the clock supernaturally. So I know it is true. Because he froze the clock when G died for 8 seconds and went in the spirit. But his lips were blue, and Jesus told me he took him in the spirit for his will and his glory, because he had to give him personal instructions of what's to come. And you will see why later when I discuss more in detail, when I release the message on the lung process, why he had to take him in the spirit. And every single thing in the lung process was all of Jesus' glory and his will, because he was using G for the symbolism of not being able to breathe the way Jesus felt on the cross. Because G is Jesus' son, and son is like Father in heaven. And so G went in the spirit, so he will get those personal instructions for when he receives his glorious body. There was nothing we could have done. It was supernatural. I was laying in bed and he started coughing, and then I didn't hear anything, so I sat up and he wasn't breathing. I freaked out and I started shaking him, and he came right back. His asthma and COPD was so bad that night, there was just nothing I could do because his medicine wasn't working. The weird thing is, 20 minutes before it happened, Jesus let me know it was coming. He said to me as I spoke it to G, "Don't tell her you are going to die, my son," in a joking way. But I did not know what he meant by that. Because Jesus knew G was thinking that in his mind and was afraid to tell me because he didn't want me to worry. Jesus has been behind the lung process from the very beginning of the journey, because when I met G, it wasn't bad at all. But it started getting bad in 2024. The second process got so bad. He was coughing until he cracked a cartilage. Let's just say we did a lot of trips to the hospital, and G was wheezing in his lungs. But we went to the hospital for a steroid and breathing treatments, and his oxygen level was always 90-something. So it never matched his symptoms with the numbers because it was all supernatural. So that night, he went in the spirit after G was coughing, and his lips turned blue while he was in the spirit. Jesus said 23 minutes to me. So I Googled it, and it takes 23 minutes or more for your lips to turn purplish blue after you die. Anyway, definitely scared me, but Jesus was in control the whole time, and he told me not to worry, and that's how I know Jesus can freeze the clock, because there's no time in heaven, and God has control of the clock. Because he was actually dead for 23 minutes in the spirit. Jesus said, but it was only 8 seconds here in the physical, and 8 seconds is not enough time for the lips to turn purplish blue, because his lips were blue, and Jesus showed me why. Every time we go to the hospital, his oxygen would be 97% or in the 90s, but they would hear his lungs, and it never matched the way he sounded because he could barely breathe. So one of the lung processes we were going through when we got to the hospital, Jesus started speaking, tells me to tell G, you were staying overnight. So I told G what Jesus said, and then the ER doctor comes in and says he recommends him for staying overnight for testing and more workups and blood work because he could have an infection. Well, I knew it was coming already because Jesus spoke it to me and told me that he was going to supernaturally change his levels for infection in his blood work. And we were going to stay overnight, so be prepared. You see, he is loving. He is so loving. He always warns us what's coming, and it's up to us to follow his will or not. It's also up to us. Are we going to trust him in everything? Because Jesus is always testing us, but we have free will. He will never force himself on us. It is up to us to follow his instructions and complete his will over our own. It is always our decision to trust and believe. He takes care of us, and when we exercise faith and believe, we see it was always his will. So we stayed overnight. G had one of his coughing attacks in the hospital, and he went in the spirit again, but he didn't die this time. And I thought he had a seizure because that's what it kind of looks like when you go in the spirit from the cough. Your eyes roll back in your head and foam a little bit out of the mouth, just like a seizure. So I yelled for the doctors and said something's happening because it scared me. Then by the time they all got in there, he was fine. So Jesus set that up also for me because he knew that I had trauma with my sister. Because when we were in the hospital months before she died, she had a real seizure and it scared me, and I remember calling for the doctors. And I have also had dreams of code blue and stuff with my sister in it. So right away I knew I had things based on fear and trauma that needed to be cleansed from my soul. So sometimes Jesus puts things in our dreams and around us in certain situations to trigger certain things so we can cleanse those things, because we do have fear and trauma. And those things can elevate our mood and impact what we do, what we think, and how we respond to certain situations. That's why the wineskin process is so important. When we got home and I gave it to the Lord, I was crying and I was on my knees praying. After we got out of the hospital, I was expecting G to be healed right away from Jesus because he just sent us on a mission that we thought we had completed. But when it comes to Jesus, now we know there is always more. So now we know it is not finished because he had us go to the hospital because we were on a mission to wake up the doctors about Jesus, to not leave him out when it comes to science, because God is science. He is all things. So we had to tell the doctors they weren't going to find anything because it was all supernatural. And we told them you can't leave out God when you're doing science. So he had us do all of that. It was a part of the mission. And we are all going to go on missions like this to wake up Jesus' people. We were like the talk of the hospital because we talked about Jesus to everyone, and the poor doctors couldn't find anything wrong with G based on all of the testing and the blood work they were drawing. They didn't know or understand why his heart rate was so high and why his wheezing was so bad in his chest, because he was just sitting there in the hospital bed and not exercising. I remember it was 132, his heart rate, and I looked up the number, and it means to heal. And the timing of everything was matching all of the numbers Jesus has given us. So we knew he was behind every part of the lung process journey. But the doctors were worried because it was abnormally high, so that he would have a stroke or a heart attack. So they suggested for him not to leave because they wanted to run more tests. But Jesus kept saying he was doing everything, so we left on blind faith because Jesus told us to. And now we know when we return in our glorious bodies, that seed God has planted on our mission, God would make it grow. So Jesus assured me he was behind the whole thing for his glory. But sometimes in the flesh we worry and we forget that God is in control of every aspect of our lives. So we followed Jesus' instructions and we released ourselves from the hospital because Jesus told us to. So when we got home, I was praying to Jesus and I was just surrendering everything and just really cleansing my heart. So that night I was listening to the song, I Surrender. And as I was praying, Jesus was having me breathe, and he took over my breath supernaturally. He held it for so long. I don't even know how long I held it for. But I told him that I would give everything to him, even my own breath. So I told him to take over with his breath to meet mine, so I can give my breath to G with God's power in it. And that's what I was doing. I literally was breathing in the spirit, but not in the physical. I was letting God breathe for me. I can't explain it, but I felt the breath coming out of my lungs without breathing in the physical. And then when I started breathing in the physical, I felt God's breath with mine. It was a really beautiful spiritual feeling, and that's when I cleansed everything, asking Jesus to take complete control and take over my breath and cleanse me from my fear and my trauma. But I literally trusted him to take over my breath so I could give my new lungs to G, because we are one in the spirit, and my energy goes inside of him as God transfers our energy together as one. So when God put him in the spirit again, instead of freaking out this time and getting scared, I calmly woke up G, making him feel at peace because he could hear me while he was in the spirit. And that matches the Adam and Eve book where she was crying over Adam, praying for the Lord to bring him back and let him wake up and breathe. So because God is always repeating patterns, we both went through that process, and G is just about finished with it until he passes it to another duplicate when we get back from heaven. This is why the Bible says, listen to the Spirit of what the Spirit is saying to the churches. You have to truly walk in the Spirit to understand these beautiful revelations he is giving and the supernatural existence. And that's the end of that message. I love you, and may the Lord bless and keep you and your family and give you his peace, love, and blessings. God bless.